Hi, this is Aaron Azrod, and welcome to the 108th episode of the Truth Island podcast. Imagine you are hopping into the shower. Unless you are a true masochist, the prospect of taking a freezing cold shower, or a scalding hot one, probably aren't what you had in mind. And yet, much of our current economic policy seems to follow our shower dichotomy. As discussed on a previous episode of this podcast, capitalism has the charming allure of a warm shower, but oftentimes leaves people and businesses feeling pretty burnt. Socialism promises to temper the flames of capitalism, but much like a cold shower, tends to stifle innovation, keeping us all frozen in place. As the US and other countries begin vaccinating and slowly exiting the grim lockdown conditions, a great question emerges as to how exactly should we be moving forward. Should the government, through FDR stimulus spending and public works program, be the road we choose to follow? Or should the easing of government restrictions and lower taxes be the preferred remedy that will spark plug the economy back to pre-pandemic levels? People eager to return to normalcy will no doubt have a preferred preference that they believe will get us to where we want to be the quickest. But what if the valves of our economic success, much like our shower, need some adjustment? Is there anyone in their right mind who wouldn't reach to turn on the cold water when their body is being scorched? Or a person who wouldn't hesitate to jump into a hot jacuzzi when outside temperatures are below freezing? Much like investing, sometimes a more timid and diverse approach might be the best way to move forward. Joining me to help find the right economic temperature, I am once again joined by Joe. Joe, I think we could agree that the only thing worse than a hot or cold shower is no shower.
That's right, absolutely. And I think that that's a beautiful intro. And I do think we're at a point now where we're trying to figure out what temperature we really want it to be. And it's not so clear. I think that we both know that a lot of help is needed at this point in time. There are a lot of people suffering, and there are a lot of systemic issues that we're now seeing come to light with e-commerce hitting numbers that they were not projected to hit for the next 10 years.
Right.
So this will fundamentally change the way we function as an economy. So actually it'll be interesting to see what the stimulus actually stimulates.
I largely I agree that we are in first off, we are in very unique times. And I think that whether you fall on the capitalist or socialist divide, I've always said, and I've like studied this in a lot of public policy classes, is that when you have some kind of devastation, some kind of depression, pandemic, or so forth, everybody wants government intervention. I don't care how much of a Texas oil tycoon, pull yourself up from your bootstraps kind of guy that you are. It's like there are times where you really need a guiding hand to kind of get us out of the forest. And I think there's a fear that that guiding hand will be there forever because, another rule in politics is once someone obtains a power, they don't want to give up that power. So that's something that we kind of have to bear in mind. But I think as of right now, we definitely are in need of a guiding hand.
I agree. I mean, wholeheartedly. I mean, there are people that are just really suffering, and especially from the lower end of the bracket. When you have a large number of the individuals making $40,000 or less a year that have now lost their jobs. These are people that are working in restaurants and in the service industry, that you start to say, okay, what needs to be done in order to provide them with interim solutions as well as a long term plan to getting them back to work? And that's really going to be the challenge. I think that we've come up with some very good interim solutions. And, the stimulus, a $1,200 check, some of these plans for evictions and delaying evictions is, they're helpful, but I don't know if they're the solution, like long term solution. So I think that that's where we really are. What needs to actually change? What policy changes? And even what short term help will enable people to get back on their feet. Because again, if this is just a short, a short-term fix, then it becomes a little bit problematic as to, all right, I have my $1,200. Now what? and and
Yeah,
I
that
and I think that that's where we are, to be quite honest.
yeah, in a place like New York, $1,200 doesn't take you far, my friend. Um,
Yeah, no, no.
and the thing about it is, I I like the way that you broke this problem down to both interim solutions and long-term solutions, because I think that if there was no pandemic at all, and this is something that I just discussed on my last episode, I think that this is a conversation we would still probably be having, because automation has been around before the pandemic. Like there's already been a trend, a lot of a lot of these kind of retail jobs, service economy jobs kind of just disappearing before the pandemic. And I think that issue now has become like enmeshed with the pandemic, but it was there before. So let's think about the interim solutions first, okay? I was just reading the journal this morning, and they were even kind, and the journal's fairly economically conservative, but even they were saying, like, would tax breaks necessarily like create more incentive to hire people? And the reason it may not work, and maybe it worked in previous times, is that if those jobs are just not there to be had, they're just not there to be had. So I think that's something that when we're thinking about even in the interim solution, oh well, we'll just spark plug this. It's like an old car. Well, there's only so many times that you can pull up another car and connect the batteries and kind of jolt the darn thing before you actually have to get your battery changed. And I think that's where we're at this point. I don't think that any kind of like little jolt is gonna keep us running for that much longer.
No, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. And there's something unique to this period of time, too. I mean, you've seen the stock market actually sustain itself during this pandemic. Now, it's not at the same level, but and you've seen drastic swings. But there's something interesting with that. In previous downturns, at least the market would somewhat reflect what was going on in the economy. That's not always the case. That's not the case here,
Yeah.
and which is actually interesting in its own right, because it comes back to another issue: is you see things like e-commerce that are fundamentally changing the economy. So these companies that are e-commerce companies and that are trading on the exchange, they're actually doing really well right now.
Yeah.
But what's going to happen to the people that are no longer able to go back to work, primarily because people are ordering their food online? People are now, in certain cases, companies are insulating themselves from future pandemics. Like they've been disrupted. So they're going to automate certain processes that they wouldn't have otherwise automated. So these things are going to now become priorities. Those companies will sustain their valuations, but what's going to happen to the people that are no longer in work? And that's the really difficult question to answer, because this is where traditional economic numbers may not tell us what to actually do, or policy policy decisions in the past will really not necessarily be the guiding light as to how to get out of this. And that's where the idea of something like a UBI and something that Andrew Yang has brought up may be a solution of sorts, but we have to be very careful with those types of solutions as well. I mean, we can't just arbitrarily just make that decision as to say, okay, I think this is just going to be something where we allocate this amount, per month to each American, which personally I am actually I don't have an opinion either way yet on that, because I really don't know what the long term effects of that may be, even on our political system.
Sure.
But it has to be on the table as far as being a discussion for the discussion, because it's the only way I see certain people being able to sustain themselves too.
Oh yeah, I think a lot of things are now on the table, and they probably have always been on the table, but we had the luxury of ignoring it, and then I think something like a pandemic kind of removes that luxury of just not seeing it pretending it's not there, but now we know that it is there. One idea, and this is an idea I've been, again, I'm not an economist, but one thing I've been grappling with is this idea that the Great Depression was actually built into the 1920s. And the theory goes that because so many people were buying things on credit, so many people were buying stocks on margin, and then you kind of see this behavior also with the 2008 housing
Sure.
crisis, where credit margin, pay us subprime mortgages, pay us back when you can, that kind of behavior has a way of like artificially inflating the stock market. And then I think that's exactly what happened in the 1920s, is that there was so many people buying things on credit, and on paper you're like, oh, we sold 100 washing machines today, yay. Oh, wait a minute, 90% of those people bought that washing machine on credit. And okay, they kept up a few payments for a couple months, but eventually it just comes to the point where no matter how much you're buying things on credit, if you don't have a job, you're going to run out of credit eventually. And then everything kind of comes to a screeching halt. And I think that's exactly what happened in 2008. They got these people who did not qualify, who had little to no income, into houses. Maybe they made, like mortgage payments for like 3 months or something, and it seemed like a touchdown in the moment. But then that person doesn't really have a job, or they are working part-time and they can't afford that house. Reality just comes and bites you. And that's one of the things that I kind of see with some of this. Not look, I think people should get 2,000. I don't want to be the dude who's like, no, we shouldn't get $2,000 checks. um, but at the same time, though, you kind of, if you inject a lot of these temporary measures with no long-term game, I think you're going to basically move the goal line. Like you're gonna delay the recession. You're gonna delay the depression. Well, we're probably already in a recession, but you're gonna delay the depression from happening. But if there's no long-term game, it's still going to happen.
Right. And I think basically, what is the fundamental problem that we're solving?
Yeah.
And that comes back to even some of these ideas, the stimulus package to begin with. What are the and the idea of irrational exuberance playing a role in this. There are these times that people just start behaving irrationally, and whether that be the 2008 crisis, the 2000 crisis, whether you go back all the way down to the Great Depression,
Yeah.
what you identified is the fundamentals aren't sound for the way the economy is perceived to be performing. And I think that that's where we're talking about what is the stimulus actually doing. We can give a stimulus out, but what is it actually doing? Is it providing a situation where you're going to be able to have some long-term sustainable employment for individuals? And I don't see, and that's the hard part about this particular package, is I have not seen anything that really addresses some of the fundamental concerns that these businesses might not be coming back.
Right. Yes.
And it's really I have not seen a lot of literature on what the Small Business Administration is doing, to facilitate loans for restaurants and places like that. I mean, and in certain cases, I can tell you just personally from where I work, and I know this is anecdotal at best, but people working remotely now. That means all those places that were restaurants and that we're planning for in these corporate campuses and things along those lines, they're gone. And,
Yeah.
and those jobs are gone. So what is really being done to manage that transition? And it's not clear to me. And that's really a risk for, I think, the economy as a whole. And it's also a risk to the political environment in DC, as the government's going to be seen as incompetent in actually, when they come up with these fiscal packages, that they're really not getting the bang for their buck that they need. And that, I think, it's going to taint the reputation of the government in an unfair way.
Mhm.
Um, if the money doesn't get to where it needs to be, I've struggled quite a bit to figure out what are the problems that really can be solved with this package, like long
Yeah,
term
right.
problems. I'm always talking about long term in this particular instance. So
And as you should, because look, I think let's just say each of us gets our, another $1,400 or $2,000 in 2 weeks from now. It's funny that you said that all of the e-commerce businesses are doing really well, because I think everyone gets their stimulus. They spend it on essential goods. I know my girlfriend is obsessed with going on Walmart.com and all, like, oh, we can buy the right toilet paper now. And
right, right.
and like all of these e-commerce companies are going to do well with even if the stimulus money goes to us, we're going to be handing it right over to them, buying essential goods essentially, and their stock prices are going to do just fine, and they're going to, the value of these companies is going to be healthy as a result of our stimulus spending, to keep us afloat. But then, as you said, eventually it's going to come to a point where it's like we can't keep passing stimuluses, and people don't have jobs to go back to. And how do you kind of remedy the larger, more systemic problem of that, of 50% of storefronts gone and just never coming back? And any of these e-commerce, there's people that work at e-commerce companies, but not anywhere in the scale that used to, that it would take to run a good old-fashioned storefront.
No, that's a great point, and I think that what this is ultimately going to result in, and that the discussion that needs to be had more than anything, is what are good economic indicators in this environment. It's no longer the idea of market capitalization,
No.
and so that may be a part of it at some point, but it's not the only measure that we ought to be looking. It's not the only measure we look at now. We look at unemployment. We look at costs. We also look at price indexes. There's a whole host of these things that we already look at. But I do think that there are going to be some other things that we're going to have to analyze uh, differently. And I think the way people basically are employed, what types of jobs that we have, we're going to have to look a little bit more closely at that. We already do. We
Yeah.
look at a lot of these things already, but um, I do think that we need to really analyze what is it, the stimulus, what did it actually accomplish, or what
Hmm.
is it accomplishing? Because if it's only pushing the market cap up for Amazon, then I don't see us necessarily. I think that could be actually detrimental not only to the country but to people like Amazon themselves, because they're going to see a backlash out of
Yeah.
that if people are suffering, and ultimately they're doing really really well, and this will opens the door up to a whole host of problems.
Yes. Now, I'm just going to preface everything that we say moving forward. This is all entirely brainstorming, okay?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but and I'm going to be looking at economics not as an economist, because I don't know how to look at it as an economist, but as a philosopher, because I do see capitalism fundamentally as a philosophical system of thought. And I think that the basic idea of capitalism is getting raw materials, getting resources, manufacturing, and then having a market to sell those goods to. Okay, that's always, and that's, I think that's a holdover from mercantilism. Finding a
Hmm.
market to sell your goods to. And for capitalism to work, there has to be a market that's willing to buy what it is that you're producing. It could be money to see a film. It could be money to go to a restaurant. It could be money to purchase physical goods. And if people are too darn poor to do any of that, the philosophy of capitalism actually fails in itself. If the general populace or the general market in which you're trying to sell goods, I don't care how crazy your advertising campaign is, you can have the best, Don Draper marketing strategist working at your company. If people just don't got the money, then they just don't got the money. They're broke. And okay, they can max out their Amex and their Visa, but we talked about this already. Eventually it's going to come to a point where it's like you have no more credit, you can't buy anything. So the only way out that I see from this is I think UBI could be definitely something to get us through. But I think perhaps government really starting to invest in like companies that are building things locally and starting to build and produce goods and produce things that we're generating within within our borders. And the reason I say that that's so important is because you need people that have enough money to buy stuff. And I think that this worldview that we've been going through, where everything is made abroad, right? And the theory behind this is because every business owner just said to themselves, right? Like, we're going to have everything manufactured abroad more cheaply, right? And each company was kind of individually thinking of themselves, and maybe rightfully so, right? They need to be competitive. If Samsung is building their phones for a lot cheaper, well, you're at a huge disadvantage if you're having them made here in the good old US of A. But I think the government needs to kind of start corralling these businesses to start building stuff here, infrastructure. Again, we love our widgets, we love our iPhones, we love our electronics, we love these things. And to not only build these things here, but to build them at a wage that allows us to want to become a self-sufficient market where we can start building stuff and start buying the very same things that we're making. As a long-term solution, I don't see another way out of this. I really don't. If we continue to outsource everything, well, then the people of this country do not have the wages to actually be a market.
And I actually see this. This is not just a United States problem. This is going to be a problem globally.
Yeah.
Going forward. And some of these things is that, and this is where UBI becomes a lot more interesting, because some of the things that you talked about is even paying the living wage. Well, the minute the wages go too high, and I don't mean they're too high, but they're not. But when does automation become the more viable option?
Right. Yeah.
And so that even if you have a living wage, well, okay, sometimes that creates an environment where you're going to automate people's jobs. And I think that that's really the problem that we're faced with. And this is a unique time in uh, American and economic history, in the sense that we really are going to have a lot of jobs automated out of existence. So then what are people going to do? And that's the difficult problem. And one of the indicators I would want to think about a little bit more is the idea of, all right, what percentage of jobs are even available anymore?
Right. Exactly. Yes.
And then how does that relate to something like UBI? How does that relate um, and the future of work needs to really be considered in this, and how to measure, like, okay, we're not going to let people just fall completely off the grid, in the sense that they're no longer even part of the employment numbers. So it's an incredible challenge, that because I don't necessarily think that it's something where you can throw out all previous economic philosophy or policies, that capitalistic, socialist, at all. Like, I don't think you can necessarily disregard everything from the past.
Hmm.
But we are at a unique time in history. We are. And I think it's going to be a very, very difficult challenge for governments to really solve some of these problems for people right now. And I think that that's where industry and government need to come together and really start to really think about these. And I think somebody like Andrew Yang really is a unique individual and politician, if you want to call him that, uh, in this particular circumstance, because I think that he has an understanding of a lot of these issues that people are now faced with.
Right.
And I think he also understands things like how disability works and how some of these other programs work. And that's the other aspect of this, is that we have programs that are in place now, but
Hmm.
they're not necessarily providing everything they need to for the citizens of this country. And I think that that's something else that needs to be looked at very closely. Why aren't they providing? We spend a lot of money on some of these programs in certain cases, and they aren't necessarily providing the need or meeting the needs of the individuals that they're servicing. And that's where government again has to really evaluate itself as much as we need to evaluate the other aspects
Yeah,
of the
no,
economy.
I think you made some really critical points here, and that is one, if the wages do get too high, then companies will start automating, and that's a natural knee-jerk reaction.
Or
100% agree.
over regulate either.
Yeah, yeah, of course, absolutely. My fear is that if it's just UBI and then nothing else, the problem is still there. The problem of people not, because again, okay, there's not, like, the answer would be no one is going to have any jobs anymore and we're all going to live off $12,000 a year. Well, that doesn't seem like a very happy and promising future. That seems like an utter complete nightmare. So let's have UBI. But I think that if we're not investing in what I would like some kind of even fiat economy, we're not going to necessarily pull ourselves out of this one. And I think something as simple as, imagine there was a company, right, that hired people to paint other people's houses. I'm thinking of jobs that just can't necessarily, like, one thing I was reading about is when it comes to like things that require the human hand, there's very specific like manual tasks that a machine just cannot really do at a high level at this point. Like, and first off, if you were to, let's say, just paint someone's wall, are you really going to bring in like a $200,000 robot into someone's apartment and let the robot paint someone's house? So I think creating this almost like patchwork, or this like having UBI but having like a fiat kind of like economy where it's like, we need people to paint this building for a week, and you hire a bunch of people and then they do that job and then they go back home for another week and then you bring them in to bring some other kind of job, and there's kind of some system built in there that's kind of producing value. You always want to be building something. You never want people to be just at home and hanging around on street corners. And I fundamentally agree, because I do think that if people are just hanging around on street corners, they are prime candidates for radicalization. Like, if
Sure,
you,
exactly.
especially your young unemployed men. My goodness, us, young unemployed men are like a communist or a fascist wet dream right there. Just, you
I
have no,
know, and I mean, and that's the fear that the environment that we're now creating, that we're now faced with. That's the problem,
yeah,
is that we have so many people that are graduating with high levels of debt
sure,
and very little hope. And one thing that we've spoken to in the past, with unrealistic expectations, that I'm going to live better than my parents did. Like, that's an automatic. That is a belief. It's not an automatic, when that simply is not sustainable.
hmm hmm
So, this is where you're starting to see, various, movements, whether there be fascist types movements, or almost to communist type of movements, that you have these radical communists anyway. They're essentially becoming radicalized because they don't have a lot of hope or even prospects at this point. And I think that that's something that we really actually have to think about in the long term. What are we going to end up with if we don't address these issues sooner rather than later? I mean, it.
Absolutely. I think the storming of the Capitol was an example of that. I don't think, I've spoken to people, oh, those people were middle class. I'm like, those people, most of them were not middle class. I think most of them were desperate at that point for something. And then I think all sorts of extreme radicals that engage in violence on both the left and the right, that's coming from a place of desperation, right? Like if you have a house that you love and a job that you love and, things in that house that you love, you're not going to run into a Capitol building and lose all of that and end up with a criminal record. You're going to be like, well, I don't want to lose my job. But
Right.
if you
Exactly.
if you have no job or you're working as a gas station attendant part-time, you're going to say to yourself, geez, I don't really have that much to lose. Screw it. Let's just flip the table over and see what comes of it. Who knows? Maybe I'll be a high-ranking fascist general when this is all over. Right? That's the kind of like mindset that you have of these people. And as you said, they're also burdened with thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in debt. The UBI is your immediate first aid. You put that UBI on, like that's the tourniquet that's making sure that you don't lose the arm. You're just
Right.
wrapping that up.
Right.
That's your food in there. But there's gotta be a like, what's our new economy going to look like? That's the question that we have to start answering. I don't want to see it become completely state controlled because then that tends to consolidate and centralize power in the hands of a few. But
Right.
we have to start thinking about like we have some pretty darn rich companies and there's other people who want to get rich. You could start making more companies that are providing that. There could be a privately run company that delivers food to the elderly. There could be a private company that goes and cleans up parks. There could be a company that sends tutors into public schools and just finance and just reinforces the adults in these buildings. There's so many things that we need that machines just cannot do at this point, or it would just be ridiculous. You can't
But
you can't you can't have like an army of 80 robots cleaning up Central Park. That's something that humans could easily do.
it's really the hardest part about this problem overall, I think, is not only with the pandemic, the shock that it's caused to the system, and what will result to that, but these are very difficult things to answer even prior to the pandemic. You
Yes.
know, how fast is the future going to be here? And I have read, you read all types of individuals, and they all have different opinions about how quickly these jobs will be automated out of existence. When will human work even be necessary anymore? And I've seen projections of 5 years, and on the, I mean, which is insane because being close enough to situations to where people will be automated out of jobs, I see it that's not something you just flip the switch and it happens.
Right. Yeah.
So it was going to be the problem. The pandemic is has brought with it is it really has brought all these problems to the forefront,
Yes. Yes. It
and
has.
it's going to really speed up that process. So now then we really have to answer these questions a little bit more quickly than we would have had to otherwise. And I think that's where we are right now. And getting back to the individuals that had stormed the Capitol, the thing that was so scary to me about that is that you're right. They weren't middle class necessarily, where they had a lot to lose, but there seemed to be a small contingent that were maybe they were probably just worried, and they still did have things to lose.
Hmm.
They're a very small contingent, and how they were able to rile up other people to do something which was completely irrational.
Yes.
So that's what's really more alarming, is how quickly people can be spun up, and that's something that's where this is a real call for ideas at this point. And I don't necessarily, and I think the really important part about coming up with real solutions that are sustainable, they can't be ideological.
No, they can't be.
And that's the only way I honestly think we'll get through this. It can't be, I think the economy needs to do this. And it's kind of, there are a set of values that we have to have, and we have to negotiate what those trade-offs are going to be. And that
Yeah.
that 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 won't happen unless the political climate, and I do think Biden has shown, and I'm not trying to bring too much politics into this particular conversation, but just something simple where he has said, not speaking ill of the other side of the aisle to his staffers or everybody, or you'll be fired. is something to me is a very good sign.
That is
Uh,
positive. I love to see kind of stuff because I think all walks of life have answers and I think they have
right,
something to bring to the table. I think some of the worst bosses don't listen to the people that are working on the floor and actually be like,
right.
"Hey, how's things going? How's business? Anything I can do or anything we need to change around here?" And like that's I always think that communication is going to be what saves us, and trust and communication
Sure.
amongst all of
Yeah.
us is going to be the way out of this. And I think thinking, and I'm kind of speaking here to my large entrepreneur, business class people here. I'm actually your friend in a way because I'm trying to save this country from some kind of hostile fascist or communist type revolution that kind of destroys all of that stuff. Like I'm actually a friend of capitalism in a way because if we start with very pragmatic solutions to all of these problems, right? Like, okay, for every job automated, we have 10 people unemployed. Great. You're, in the next quarter, your stocks are going up because you automated. Fantastic. Where is that going to be leaving your company 10 years down the line when everyone's too bloody poor to afford anything that you're manufacturing anymore? So you see, every wealthy person's wealth is actually at risk because if you have too many poor people in this country, okay, yeah, you'll have an island of, 50,000 elites that live in a gated community. Great, but most people that just have any money right now, your money is at risk if you have too many darn poor people who can't buy what it is that you're selling. And I think that could be like a plea to almost kind of slow down the automation as much as possible. And I get that no one wants to be the odd man out. If Microsoft says, okay, we're not doing any more automation, and then all these other companies do it, well, they're going to be the odd guy out. I get it, but there has to be some kind of collective talk about that amongst these companies of like, hey, we're going to wreck this whole, we have it pretty darn good right now. We're going to wreck this whole game if we keep pushing it too far. I'm not saying that we can't get to a point where everything is automated, but we're not ready for that just yet.
I mean, I really like the way you phrase that in the sense that, well, we want to get to a point of sustainability, right?
Yeah.
And I think that this is this is where Andrew Yang has really been ahead of the curve. He's like, there are parts of automation that you're not going to be able to stop, and part of that is like the delivery of food, right? You're automating, truck drivers' jobs, and you're bringing down the price of food. Therefore, there's something that's beneficial, but you're going to have this whole slew of individuals that are now unemployed.
Sure.
So, so what are you going to do about that? And we're all at risk if you don't answer that problem. And it really what I think, and the reason I think he's an excellent candidate to explain this to business leaders is to say, you know, just what you just said was perfect, in that it really is a situation where we're all at risk.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how much money you're making. You know, if you're a trillionaire, it really doesn't matter if you're the only person with any money. So the idea that if everybody else is starving, they're going to come for you one way or the other.
Yeah.
And either they're going to come through you through regulations, whether they come through the idea of taxes, whatever it may be, or even in certain cases, obviously violence, as we've seen history has shown us. And those are the types of things that are, where people need to understand that this is something that you're as much at risk as the people that you're automating out of a job.
Yes. I think that needs to be understood. And it's hard because I think that if you're CEO of a company, you got to be CEO by focusing on the one company that you're focusing on the thing that directly affects you and the one thing that you're proud of or the one thing that you founded. And that's a natural impulse. That's what makes you successful is because that's your baby and that's what you're focusing on. But I think this is a pivotal moment right now where businesses have to kind of understand that fundamental thing of like, if you keep going down this direction, you're going to be king of an ant colony. That's all
Right.
that's going to be left.
Exactly. Exactly.
You're going, and that's not really fun because ants aren't very challenging and they're not really the most
Right.
engaging things to roll over, good for you. So if you really want to be a powerful business tycoon in a powerful country, you got to start, and I think, maybe the government can give like a helping hand or a helping push in this direction, but there has to be that understanding of like every single time you create a job that doesn't pay a livable wage, every time that you outsource another job, every time you automate another job, you're coming closer and closer to becoming the ant king.
Right. And I think and again, there are innovative ways of looking at this. Like, and I'm not familiar as familiar as I should be with Andrew Yang's what is it? Basically, where you're compensated for your own personal data if somebody's willing to
Oh
collect
yeah,
on
he
it.
wanted to give like a dividend,
Yeah.
like from big tech. Yeah.
Essentially, there's a dividend for your information, giving up your information, and I do need to study that a little bit more in detail. But those are the types of solutions that we're going to have to come up with,
Mm-hmm.
where we start to say, okay, why now we're all benefiting from this,
Yes. Yeah.
and it's not just the big tech company, but it's also the individuals that your customers. And so that's not, it's again, I think the really challenging part is going to be really kind of understanding where we are in the way the system's functioning right now, because there are programs that are in place
Yeah.
that are supposed to be helping people that are not helping people. That needs to be analyzed just as closely as something that say these new ideas in addition to these new ideas.
You know,
So yeah, go
what's
ahead.
very interesting about what you're saying, and it just got, and it's like when we really think about platforms like, like Facebook and YouTube, they're really generating profit off of us entertaining each other. Because when you really think about it, when someone creates a funny meme and posts it on Facebook, that's a dude or a girl working for free, right? They're actually
Sure.
working for free, posting something on Facebook to entertain their friends. That's like a free employee. Like it's almost, in some ways it's ingenious that like they have gotten us to like, if you think about like Barnum and Bailey circus, right? Well, those guys had to hire clowns and
Right.
acrobats
Right.
and people
Right.
to entertain us, right?
Right. Right.
These companies have gotten us to work for free and entertain each other, and they're making way more money than Barnum and Bailey ever thought imaginable.
One example, I always thought about this is that, instead of having to hire actors to be in a commercial, we're the commercial.
Yes,
And I
yes.
mean, that's really where we are now. And that's what social media is to a certain degree. They've gotten us to be the advertisements for whatever products and companies that they want to that they want to push. So for example, even if it may be a restaurant, well, I'm going to this restaurant, now I'm showing my friends on social media that I'm going to this restaurant. Now everybody wants to go to this restaurant, and in the background here is Facebook and or whatever media platform that
Or
people are
how
using.
many countless videos have you seen where it's like, hey guys, I'm going to be reviewing the new Samsung Galaxy, and it's like, that's free. Even if like it's not the best review in the world, that's free marketing.
Oh, sure.
Free marketing. And okay, sometimes the company will give them a free phone or something for it. I've heard of stories like that. But like generally speaking, a $500 phone that the company gave you for free to review it is not the same as a 60K job with a 401k and health insurance. It's not,
Right, 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 right.
like,
Exactly, exactly.
so you're getting, all of this free labor, free intellectual creation. Like the whole industry of journalism has been completely destroyed because there's so many darn people who are writing free blogs and putting that up, whereas every person that's putting up a blog, well, that's a journalist. That's a journalist out there now that is out of a job or something like that. And what we need to be saying is that there's obviously tasks for us to be doing. what's the question that we need to be asking is, why aren't we being compensated for these very important tasks that we are doing? That's the thing. It's like, just, like, we make it seem, oh, there's no jobs left, there's nothing to be doing. I mean, there's always something to be doing. There's always value. People could be writing books, people could be creating media channels and doing all sorts of stuff. It's just like, we need to start monetizing and start incentivizing this behavior. It's not right that people are just doing this for free forever and ever and ever, and not seeing anything from it.
Right, and I think that this really gets to the heart of another thing that the idea when you have free labor doing
Yeah.
things, the wealth gap. I mean, that's something that legitimately can be addressed, and now there are various policy ways that you can address that as well. But that's something, that's a measure I think that people ought to be looking at, politicians in particular, as a way of trying to figure out what programs are actually going to work,
Yeah.
with this, what policies are actually going to be effective in helping close that wealth gap, not wage gap necessarily, but wealth gap. And that to me is something where uh, I haven't heard anything from either side of the aisle really. You do hear things, but it's lip service,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's never. Well, I mean, you do hear people speak about the idea of billionaires and too many billionaires, and for which I'm in agreement. But that's not, that gets you halfway there, or not even really. It's more than that. There's these, the gap is much bigger than just I don't know how many billionaires there are in the world, but and the rest of us.
Yeah.
But so I think that there are systemic issues that really need to be analyzed on how to close that gap as a way, as a solution to these. And again, I don't know if they're public works programs. I don't know. I don't. It's still not clear to me what the solution is, because it's such a complex problem. You can't just hire people to do something and think it's going to be sustainable.
Well, what
And
if,
yeah.
and here's an idea of maybe, and I wish, I don't know how to code, but maybe someone who's listening who knows how to code can steal this idea off of me. Since we have such an anger and hostility towards big tech, what if somebody went out there and created a new platform? Okay. And obviously they're putting in the hard work and spending long hours coding this darn thing, and they deserve to be CEO and make tons of money and be rich. But what if someone created a new version of Facebook, a new version of YouTube, where you actually got paid for being on these platforms? Like I think that is something, because, like, if you suddenly started paying people to be behind screens, well, now the content that people are organically generating they're now reaping rewards off of that. And I'm telling you, whoever actually implemented that idea, because if Joe, would you watch something on YouTube if there was another platform that paid you to watch that same thing?
Well, I mean, no. I mean, the reality is no. But I think it's where there's just this competition for our time,
Yeah.
and what happens is ultimately, like, you're right. I would jump to another platform in a moment, but there's places where people are centralizing, and that's where, unfortunately, that's where a lot of these companies are getting their power. So it's you're trying to reach as many users as you can, and that's where the challenge, I think, and I need to really go back and look at the antitrust approaches that are now being kicked around with potentially Amazon, Facebook, and Google, and really start to think about that, because I do think that may be an option as well, but it's still, there's a lot of issues that come with antitrust that unforeseen results based on you know actions that the government has taken. So in
Right.
certain ways, Rockefeller benefited from antitrust more than he would have if he stayed together. Uh, so there's those issues as well that exist. So
because
I
I think that like the to form like another one of these like social media platforms or any of these other things, like yeah, there is overhead. You probably have to have office space and really powerful servers, but it's not the kind of overhead that you have when you're building, let's say, a Model T, right? I don't think
Sure, no,
I
no.
don't think
The
your
barriers of
cost,
entry are lower.
your barrier of entry is a lot lower. So I do think that this is like an area that we could start investing in to and again, there's so much value. Like I've always said this, and I read this one our article that said that like never work for a company that doesn't know how to make you make value. Like if there's a company that says, well, we really can't pay you or something like that, well, they're just not trying hard enough, because
Right,
it's like
right,
any time that you have flesh and blood, human beings, there's always a way to make, and this sounds callous, but there's always a way to make that, to bring value out of that person, and might vary from person to person, but there's always that potential to do that. And I think that we're just not being creative enough. I think this is a creativity problem where it's just like everything that I'm hearing is not solution oriented. It's like the economy is going to collapse. We're going to all go on UBI or maybe not, and it's going to be a revolution and so forth. And I'm like, all of these things could be solved with some creative thinking. And that's what's very sad about this, is that there is a way out of this. It just requires ideas that just have never been implemented before, or at least experimenting with ideas that have never been
yeah,
implemented
and I think
before.
that requires us to be flexible,
Yeah,
and requires us to be flexible with our politics, and
absolutely.
and and that's really that's why it's so important for politicians to really kind of see the underlying issues, because they're, again, just like the billionaires, uh, they have a lot to lose in this.
They do.
They have a lot to lose in this process as well, as they had witnessed on January 6th. Is that, they do have a lot to lose if you get people. Now, granted, were they ever really at risk? I'm sure that to some degree they were. But the next time it may be much more calculated, of an attack of sorts, and so they do have a lot at risk here. And I
Yeah,
think that
we're looking out for them, and it's weird, but like in a way, like like a society, everyone in a society becomes richer when everyone is rich. Like
right,
that's
right.
it's just that simple. Like as the tide gets higher, everybody gets richer. And okay, yes, there's always like taxation sucks, higher taxes suck, and initially there's like that punch in the gut that hurts, and I get that. I absolutely get it. But in the long run, you're going to be way wealthier and way more powerful, over a colony of humans than ants. That's what I keep driving that message home over and over and over and over again. I'm not this super idealist that thinks that we are all just lovey-dovey teddy bears that like, I am a realist, but I think that you can be powerful if you're thinking about the long game. Like I think that it's in our collective interest to act a certain way.
I agree, and unfortunately, right now, it doesn't seem like, there th- that people are mostly in a at least understanding of what you're saying, and I hope it doesn't take anything too serious in order to get their attention for the future. Because we're at a point, and this is what the pandemic has really brought out, is that people are going to go from, they were already hurting,
Yeah.
they're going to go to really hurting, and I think that puts us at there's a really big risk here going forward. And if, again, I think we need people that are going to either talk to each other or abandon their ideologies. And really, I know this sounds idealistic, and where, but there are a lot of problems right now that, if this 1.9 trillion doesn't come back with some solutions for people, that you're going to see a lot of people that are going to be very angry.
Yes.
And I think that they're politicians need to start looking at problems and not necessarily programs either.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
that's the other part about this process. I think that that's a critical thing. Where what do I mean by that? And we've talked about this. Is there's an opioid addiction. There's these types of issues that are like cancers to our society.
Hmm.
So it's not just getting the person off of opioids. It's getting them employed so they don't go back onto opioids.
Thank you. Thank you. You stole the words right out of my mouth. Absolutely. I think that, you know, again, I get that we need short-term remedies, short-term boosts. I consider it like cortisone shots. We all need, like you're in pain, you get a cortisone shot, but you're going to have to get that surgery sooner or later. And what do you want that surgery to look like? Do you want it to be 1917 Russia? Or do you want it to be a brand like a more powerful, robust economic system that propels us well into, the 21st century? I think that's the choice that we have right now before us.
I,
And it looked like there's no answers. Come talk to me and come talk to Joe. We've got answers.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm always up with
I'm not. I'm
ideas.
not. Hey, I'm not saying that every one of my ideas is going to fly to the moon, but at least we're trying. Joe, thank you so much for at least trying with me out here.
Hey, anytime, Aaron, and it's always great to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
This concludes the 108th episode of the Truth Island podcast. I'm Aaron Azarod.